Winning at poker in 2025 isn't about luck. It's about staying ahead. The best players aren't just studying the game, they're evolving with it. They study smarter, adjust faster, and make better decisions under pressure. This video is your roadmap to mastering the 3 cornerstones of elite poker performance: strategy, study, and mindset. You'll learn how top players fine-tune their approach, refine their study process, and develop the mental edge needed to crush high-level competition. Let's dive in. Well, this is different. Hi everyone, I'm Thomas21, head coach for GTO Wizard, and I don't normally show my face on screen. Personally, I prefer to be behind the mic and concentrate on what I'm showing on the screen, but I've been told that people might like my videos better if I put a webcam on there, so I figured, let's try it. Now, if you've been around GTO Wizard, you might have seen my work before. If not, welcome. Now you can finally put a face to the voice. But that's enough of that. Let's get into why you're really here. How to actually crush poker in 2025. Let's get into it. What makes a crusher in 2025? It's not just about knowing a good strategy or studying more or tilting less. The real winners, they've mastered 3 things: how they play, how they study, and how they think. See, it's not about the outcome, it's about refining the process that leads to a better outcome. They know how to apply unstoppable strategies at the table, adapting, exploiting, and making fearless decisions. Secondly, they approach study like an engineer, breaking the game down, sharpening their edge, and studying efficiently. And third, they've built an indestructible mindset, one that can handle tilt, manage emotions, and stay sharp under pressure. These are the 3 cornerstones of a winning poker player, and today we're going to break them down. All right, quick pause. If you're seeing this, congrats, you found an Easter egg. You're here watching this video because you want to crush poker in 2025. So here's your challenge. What's the biggest change you're making to your game this year? Drop your answer in the pinned comment, and I'll randomly pick 15 of you to win a 1-month premium GTO Wizard subscription on February 12th. Good luck. Applying unstoppable strategies. There are 4 key things you need to become a dominant poker player. The first is strong fundamentals. So you need a rock-solid foundation because without that, everything else crumbles. Secondly, you need an adapt or die mindset. If you've been playing the same strategy for too long, maybe it's time to update that. If you don't adjust and try and exploit your opponents, maybe this is the year to try. Poker is a game where you either sink or swim, so adapt or die. Thirdly, you need to be willing to face hard decisions head on. Many players kind of avoid difficult decisions and they'll adjust their strategy in such a way that they won't have to make difficult decisions on future streets, which is often going to be a mistake. Lastly, you need to have the discipline to break free from autopilot, which is the C game curse that most people suffer from when you're just button clicking. All right, let's get into it. Master the fundamentals. If you don't have a strong foundation, nothing else matters. Now, I'm not saying that you need to be some math wizard. You don't need to calculate everything at the table and try and what's the EV of 6-6? No, you don't need to do any of that. But you do need to at least understand the basic mission critical concepts first. What do I mean by that? There are certain mathematical concepts in poker, such as if your opponent bets bigger, you are not obliged to defend as wide to prevent their bluffs from profiting, right? So if they bet big, you can fold more. You don't have to, but you can. You can get away with that without being exploitable. Another example is if you bet bigger, you're supposed to bluff more often. You need to have some basic grasp of combinatorics, like roughly what percentage of my opponent's range is going to be trips on a paired board. You need to have it, even if you don't know that number, you should have a feel for that, right? And so without kind of these basic fundamentals, you just can't master the game. So this is what I would argue is one of the first steps. Next, let's talk a little bit about GTO and exploitative principles. So most coaches will tell you that you need a GTO baseline from which to recognize and attack exploits. So like, oh, I know my opponent is not playing GTO. Here's how they're deviating. Here's how I'm going to attack them. But the truth is it goes both ways. Like it's very hard to look at a solver output and understand what the heck the solver is doing without having some sort of exploitative training. Because GTO solves are built out of exploitative simulation. And so the potential exploits in the position actually inform the Nash equilibrium strategy. And so what I'm saying is don't study GTO and don't just lean on exploits. You need both together, two sides of the same coin. Next, think in ranges, not just hands. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that poker is a game of Bayesian updates. So what I mean by that is that when your opponent makes some action, they're representing a range of hands with that action. And so their range represents your belief about what they're doing here. And similarly, your range in a solver represents what they believe about you, right? So that's all ranges are. They're just beliefs, really. And whenever you or your opponent make an action, you're updating those beliefs. So the best players in the world, every last one of them, are thinking in terms of ranges nonstop. And they're very, very good at narrowing down ranges based on the action sequence. Most novices either just play their hand or they get to the point where they can think about their range pre-flop, but they can't really update it based on the post-flop action. But if you want to get really good, you absolutely must learn how to think through and do a range analysis all the way to the river. And lastly, textures. So textures dictate strategies. What I mean by this is that the board texture will determine how you can play based on things like range and nut advantage, based on what hands are available and what hands will probably come up on future streets. So you need to kind of break it down by different types of textures in order to make studying more efficient. Because if you try and study every single board at once, you're going to go crazy, right? So monotone boards play a very specific way. Paired boards play a very specific way. Ace high dry boards play a very specific way. Like, mid-connected boards play a very specific way. So there's different types of textures. And if you've ever played poker, you probably already have a pretty strong intuition for this. But you need to kind of chunk it out like that in order to make your study more efficient. Adapt or die. Poker is a very quickly evolving game, and if you don't evolve with the times, you will be naturally selected out of the player pool. Lucky for you, there are exploitative opportunities everywhere. Everyone's imbalanced. There's money to be made if you're looking to make it. The issue is that most players either don't study, or if they do study, they're trying to approximate some very bad version of a Nash equilibrium strategy that's actually still quite exploitable, and in doing so, missing all of the actual EV by failing to exploit their opponent's mistakes. Hear me, I'm not saying GTO is bad, I'm not saying trying to play a Nash equilibrium strategy is bad. I explained earlier, it's two sides of the same coin. What I'm saying is the number one mistake I see most mid-stakes players making, even low stakes, is that they're trying to play this fixed pseudo equilibrium strategy and then just not thinking about all of the ways their opponent's screwing up. And that's the wrong mindset. Which brings me to my next point. Play the player, not just the spot. Learning the spot is good. Learning the GTO strategy for spot is better. But learning that you shouldn't play against a nit the same way you should play against a maniac is probably even more important, right? And adjustments are an arms race, right? So poker's dynamic. When you adjust, smart opponents, in fact, most people will start adjusting back to you. Unless you're playing anonymous games, they're going to counter. You can't just expect your opponents to sit there and not change what they're doing against you. So you need to kind of pay attention to what your image says about you and how your opponents might be deviating to attack their perceived version of what you are, if that makes sense. And lastly, use node locking to engineer exploits. Now, this is the hard part because it requires learning how to use one of the more advanced solver tools. Luckily, we have a couple great videos for it. I'll show it here and here on the screen, and that way you guys can go check those out and learn more about how to use node locking to create a very powerful strategy. Face hard decisions head on. Many players kind of avoid tough spots all the time. I knew this one guy that would just always fold flush draws and straight draws, even combo draws and 3-bet pots to a second barrel, because he just didn't want the variance and he didn't want to make that really difficult play on the next street. The truth is, guys, that most people are avoiding tough decisions because they lead to pain later on and decision fatigue. And while avoiding decision fatigue is a very natural response, if you always dodge these tough spots, you're going to cap your growth, right? You need to be able to take on these difficult challenges sometimes in order to grow as a player. And discomfort is a sign of growth. Now, I'm not saying you should take every difficult spot. Time EV matters. So I would rather have a better hourly than big blinds per 100. So you got to pick your battles wisely. But the key here is to eliminate fear-based avoidance, right? You want to avoid a spot based on a strategic choice rather than out of a fear-based habit. Hope that makes sense. Break free from autopilot. Autopilot is probably the number one reason most players hit a skill ceiling. They learn a decent strategy, it's a solid strategy, but then, you start multi-tabling and then you're just kind of playing the same strategy all the time. And again, autopilot isn't the enemy. It's kind of a natural response that reduces decision fatigue. And so everyone autopilots to some degree. But the important thing here is that you need to learn how to come out of autopilot for those important, critical spots and really think through those spots. So pros use kind of a selective autopilot to slow down in critical spots and really focus in on their play where they're not sure. Now, as a beginner, there's going to be a lot more spots where you're unsure, and so you generally should be slowing down just all around, right? Another way you can tackle this is to mark important spots for review later on, because even if you can't think through the spot right now, even if you don't have enough time or stamina to do that, marking it and then thinking through it later will still help you, right? And so if you're not marking spots in your session, you're probably just leaving money on the table because that's a really important part of your growth. Chapter 2, Engineering a Winning Approach. Improvement isn't random, it's a structured process. And the best pros, they're not just optimizing what they're studying, they're optimizing how they're studying. Now, there are 5 key things I've noticed every pro does. Firstly, they focus on why rather than what. And the reason is that if you don't know why a play is happening, then you don't know why you should be playing it, right? So rather than trying to memorize outputs, you want to learn why the solver is saying you should bet this hand here. Secondly, gamify your study routine. Now, GTO Wizard is chock full of amazing study tools, but let's face it, they're work. It feels like work. And the truth is that it's not sustainable long-term to try and practice every day. You need to find ways to make studying more fun, to make it more efficient, to gamify the experience a bit and make it enjoyable, because if it's not enjoyable, you won't be able to do it consistently. Third, invest in your edge, whether that be through a coach, learning the latest tools, buying the latest book, or just watching the rest of this YouTube video. Investing in your edge is the most plus EV thing you can do if you plan to play a lot of poker in your lifetime. Fourth, focus on what matters. There's a million spots to study, a million concepts, and a million blocker effects. But the truth is that only a handful of these have a big impact on your win rate. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to identify those spots and how to quantify and prioritize what spots to practice next. Lastly, learn where your EV comes from. You see, I don't actually care if ace-5 is betting here or what deuces is doing or king-6. The strategy is not as meaningful to me as the idea of how these hands are making money, right? And if you can't figure out how they're making money, then do you really understand why they're making those plays in the first place? But it's not that easy, right? Like a solver is not going to just tell you, oh, it's making money because of this and that. You have to go look and figure it out. I would argue number 5 is the hardest part, but also one of the most critical steps to understanding solver outputs and creating unstoppable strategies. Learn why, not what. Focus on principles, not just solver outputs. I want to know why the solver is making this play. Now, it's not always obvious, but if you only focus on memorization, you won't get anywhere because there's too many spots, there's too many hands, you can't memorize it all. You're just human, right? It's much more efficient to figure out, oh, it's doing this because reason, and then apply that heuristic to a wide variety of spots, right? That's a far more efficient studying routine than, oh, I bet ace-5 in this 3-bet pot in this check-check double barrel line. Like, you need to go wider, right? Especially when you're newer. So ask why the solver makes certain plays. Don't just copy it, try to figure out the underlying reasoning. One of the best ways to do this is to experiment with the inputs and see how the outputs change. So we have cause, we have effect, right? And you want to try and map cause to effect together. Understanding what changing these inputs does to these outputs lets you build up an internal model of how to play poker. And so when your examples of this would be changing the ranges, changing the bet sizing, changing the rake, node locking. All of these are examples where we are changing the input parameters and seeing how it affects the output strategy, right? And so just by experimenting with those inputs and those outputs, you can build up a much stronger internal model and kind of build your brain solver, as it were. Gamify your study routine. Many coaches, myself included, have made the mistake of suggesting overly ambitious studying routines to our students. You know, you got to do 500 drills in a range builder and review your hands and all this, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run every single day. It's too much. We have very limited bandwidth as humans. Like, the truth is that it's much better to build a routine that you can actually stick to for many years and a long time than it is to study your ass off for like a week and then never again, right? So the best way to do this is to learn how to gamify your study routine. Most players use some mixture of reviewing their hands, practicing drills, going through the solver, reviewing with friends, etc. The best ways I've found are to kind of track your progress, to stay motivated, to see like, okay, I'm improving in this spot. Do things like compete with friends, set goals, structure challenges. Anything with your poker friends is going to be more fun. So I suggest checking out our Discord. We actually have a bunch of study groups in there that can make it a much more enjoyable experience to learn together. You could do things like create a drill, send it to your poker friends, and see who does better in these spots. Or just review hands and laugh at the crazy plays you make together. Poker can be lonely, so it's important to try and do it with friends and try and make it more enjoyable rather than going at it as a lone wolf. Invest in your edge. A lot of players will tell me, well, I don't know if I want to hire a coach or get a GTO Wizard subscription or buy this latest book or this course because my bankroll is this, and here's where I am. But this is kind of a very naive mindset, right? Think about how many more hands of poker you're going to play in your lifetime. Is it 1,000, 100,000, 1 million, 10 million? Like, how many more hands do you want to play at this current level of skill when you could be playing at this level of skill? So why wouldn't you invest earlier on rather than waiting until you're already playing high stakes to start investing? You're intentionally choosing like the slowest possible path. If you want it like streamlined and get the quickest progress possible, you need to invest as early on as possible into your own edge. Now, how do you do this? Well, there's lots of free material. Check out our blog or our YouTube page. I'm very proud of our writers and the people making YouTube videos for us. I think we build some of the highest level poker content on the internet for free. I mean, like, bar none. Now, we also have some structured study plans. Again, those are free. You can just go check them out. And if you're a premium member, you can go check out our high-level coaching seminars every week. We have a ton of recordings. At some point in your life, you might want to hire a coach. I'd recommend checking out this 2+2 page. There's lots of coaches here. You can kind of see what their rates are, what other people are saying about them, what they specialize in. You can kind of find a coach that fits your need. And at some point, you'll probably want to learn how to use a solver like GTO Wizard, right? So that's kind of the service we offer. A one-stop shop to take you from amateur to pro. And so we've got GTO solutions, we've got node locking tools, we've got trainers and coaching seminars. You can upload your hand histories. You can practice building your entire range or playing one hand at a time. There's a ton of features, and it's all designed to kind of take you from beginner to expert. That said, the biggest thing you can do is just start investing in your edge today rather than waiting until you're already a high-level player, right? Just by tick. Focus on what matters. There are a million things to study and not enough time to study them. So one of the biggest challenges with building modern poker tools is figuring out how to prioritize what's important. The truth is that not all study is created equal, and spending time on the right things is what separates elite players from the rest. You need to prioritize high impact areas of the game because the truth is that some spots occur far more frequently and have a far bigger impact on your win rate than many other spots. So there's tons of spots that are like barely important and a few spots that are very important. And so learning to quantify that and saying, this is the spot you should study next, then this spot is just going to have a much bigger impact on your win rate, right? A very simple example of this is the fact that ace-high boards occur way more often than monotone boards on the flop. And so if you're starting out and you're like, well, I don't know how to play either, maybe start with the one that occurs more often. So I'll show you a simple spreadsheet application that I've built here to help you prioritize post-flop spots and kind of chunk them together in a way that they're somewhat strategically similar. All right, guys, this is my spot importance spreadsheet. Now, you might have seen the V3 version of this. This one is specifically designed for 6-max cash players, but here's how it works, right? We've got all of these formations: button versus big blind, single raise pot, small blind versus big blind 4-bet pot, under the gun versus hijack 3-bet pot, cutoff versus button cold call, single raise pot. Like, there's all of these different spots that can occur in a 6-max cash game. But how do we know which one to study? Well, one approach is to figure out which spot is more frequent. So as you can see, like button versus big blind, this is way more frequent than under the gun versus big blind 4-bet pot, right? So the frequency of a spot matters, but also so does the starting size of the pot. Yeah, this one down here is way less common, but the average pot size and the starting pot size are both much bigger. And so you can kind of multiply the frequency by the pot size to figure out the expected value of some spot. As in, you can think of this like an importance metric, as in how much it matters or how much it affects your EV. And then for each of these, what you can do is type in your GTO Wizard score or your EV loss as a percentage of the pot per hand, whatever metric you like. And based on this, it's going to update the practice priority. So let me give you an example. Let's say you go and study some single raise pots and you get pretty good and you bump all of these up to, let's say, 80%, right? 80%, 80, not 800. So I'm going to go and just type in my GTO Wizard score. And what this does is it says, okay, you got pretty good at these single raise pots. Let's change our priority. So I'm going to change this up. Okay, now it's time to be practicing some button versus blind 3-bet pots, right? And so we'll bump those up a little bit. Say we get 80 and 80. And it's like, okay, what's the next most important spot? Well, again, I'll just sort by practice priority. It's blind versus blind 4-bet pots, right? And you just keep going like this and slowly improving one step at a time. Now, I guess some feedback I had about the previous version of the sheet I made is that this is too many spots, right? There's just so many different spots. So what you can do instead is kind of group them into like grouped drills. So for example, here we have late position versus blind 3-bet pot. So given my current priorities, this is my highest priority. And so this would be like cutoff and button versus some of the blinds. And you can actually change this. Like there's a settings tab in here I've got hidden somewhere. But yeah, you can like define what group name is assigned to each position to create these group drills. And you can also change these up to get like to create new types of drills. And so if you change these parameters, it will automatically create new drills for you. And the cool thing is you can actually just click this and it's going to open up a GTO Wizard solution that allows you to just go and directly train this spot. And so you can go right from this to this. And similarly, if you want to drill down on each of these particular formations, the drill and the aggregate report is right next to it. So it's very convenient in that sense. But here, for example, we can see the aggregate report across all flops for this blind versus blind 4-bet pot spot. By having that immediate access to go from like, this is what needs work, to here's the drill, here's the aggregate report, you can build some really efficient study routines. You know, I need to improve blind versus blind 4-bet pots. Here's the aggregate reports. What are some patterns I notice, right? Let's start filtering for example, paired boards. How are we playing paired boards, right? What about monotone boards? And so you can start building your big heuristics this way, and then you can dive in and start practicing that spot directly. And so this is my attempt to try and make studying as easy and as intuitive as possible for all post-flop formations. Now, a lot of people have asked, what about like other formats? You know, straddle and ante, MTT, etc. And those are things that I'd like to come out with eventually, but since 6-max cash is my specialty, I figured this is the one I want to release first. So anyway, I've also got these charts here. These are kind of fun. What these do is they show you the sum of practice priority, as it were. And so, for example, let me focus on this one here. most important spots when we're grouping them by the aggressor position and pre-flop action. So IP SRP means in position single raise pot. So the aggressor is in position and we're playing a single raise pot. This grouping is going to be the most important when you're just starting out, right? So this is like button versus big blind single raise pot, cutoff versus big blind single raise pot, etc. Then we have out of position 3-bet pot. Why would it be out of position? Why is out of position more important? Well, because generally you 3-bet more out of the blinds and you 3-bet bigger out of the blinds. So that tends to be more important than in position 3-bet pot, which is down here. Then out of position 4-bet pots as well. And so you can kind of see these different groupings and see which formations are the most important to study. Position-wise, keep in mind I've reset all of these so that it's the same thing. So every spot is now, we're getting an equal score on it. So that I've just kind of reset the practice priority. But down here, we can see like most important positions. Unsurprisingly, big blind is the most important. And this kind of aligns with modern poker theory. This is where you lose the most money. This is where you make the most plays. So getting that right is important. Followed by button, one of the widest positions, but also kind of makes up the majority of your win rates. Then small blind, cutoff, hijack, and under the gun. So you get kind of some surprising orderings out of here. A lot of people ask like, what's more important, single raise pots, 3-bet pots, or 4-bet pots? Well, by going through this method, I found that 3-bet pots are less important individually, but there are more formations of 3-bet pots than there are formations of single raise pots. So perhaps too many people are over-invested in single raise pots and haven't developed their strategy in 3-bet pots enough. And then just kind of however you slice it, 4-bet pots are just going to be less important overall until you don't want to dive into 4-bet pots until you've spent a decent amount of time in single raise pots and 3-bet pots. But the beauty of this method is that it'll make it kind of obvious, like when one of these needs to improve. And then over here, we have the most important spots grouped. So like these are your own groupings that you can create. You can change these, by the way, like you can change the group name so that they make more sense to you in settings. So let's say that it's kind of weird to group small blind and big blind into one group because they play so differently. So I might just write them out like that, in which case you'll get like different groupings here, right? Anyway, that's the new spot importance sheet. I think it's a really cool study tool. I hope you guys like it. If you have any suggestions for improvements, let me know in the comments down below. To use it, you can just go File, make a copy, and then just start typing in your own GTO Wizard scores, or alternatively, again, you can type in your EV loss as a percentage of pot per hand, which is a standard metric you can find in GTO Wizard as well. Learn where EV comes from. The best players know exactly where their edge comes from and how to maximize it. And this is true for every hand class. So the truth is that it's not important how you play a hand, it's important that you understand how your hand makes money. Right? Now, how do you see that? It's not obvious in a solver. If you go look at the expected value for some hand, you'll see how much money it's making, but you won't see how to make that money. That makes sense, right? So in practice, what this often involves is zoning into some particular hand class and navigating from flop to river in a bunch of main lines and seeing how it plays out and how this hand actually wins and where you end up folding. Doing this will teach you how your hand makes EV in standard lines, but along the way, you'll probably notice things like, wait, would my opponent actually do that? Are they going to find this hero call or make this massive fold? Probably not. And when that happens, maybe you should go node lock those mistakes and see how your hand class changes its strategy to exploit that. In general, I recommend applying the scientific method to poker. And the weakest, like the most basic version of this is just change the input, see what happens to the output, right? Input, output, cause, effect. If you understand cause and effect, you understand what drives good strategy. I have a coaching video on this. It's called Applying the Scientific Method to Poker. If you want to learn more about hypothesis building and a more rigorous way to approach poker. But in general, I recommend just being playful. Change the inputs, change the rake, change the bet size, see what happens along the way. And really, don't just focus on one street. Try and go all the way to the river, because that's how you're going to learn how your hand derives money. That brings us to chapter 3, The mental game, forging an indestructible mindset. The truth is that you can have the best strategy and the best study routine, and none of that matters if you fall apart under pressure. Poker is a game of decisions, and the biggest edge comes from those who make the best decisions when the pressure is high. Most people don't do this. The best players don't just think clearly when things are going well, they know how to stay composed and unshaken when everything is going wrong. So first, we'll talk a little bit about setting goals. You want to set goals you can control. And this is because when you focus on execution over results, you get a much better, more stable mindset. Secondly, you need to learn how to regroup when your game slips. And everyone tilts, that's fine. Learning how to take it from a mistake to snowballing out of control is a really important skill every poker player needs to learn. Don't suppress your emotions, right? In general, emotions are data, and that's not a bad thing. They just tell you things about yourself, about how your mind operates. It's better to process rather than suppress your emotions. Level up your lifestyle. The truth is that your brain is your most important asset as a poker player. And if you're not doing kind of like the soft skills that are needed to make good decisions, like sleeping and eating well, you're not going to make good decisions, right? If you live like crap, you're not going to be able to think straight. Simple as that, right? And lastly, leave ego out of the equation. Ego is kind of like the silent bankroll killer. Poker has this weird sense of punishing entitlement, punishing stubbornness, and punishing pride. So the sooner you learn to let go of ego, the faster you'll improve. Okay, let's get into it. Set goals you can control. In poker, you can't control the outcome of a hand, but you can control how you played the hand. So what you really need to do is learn to detach from the results so that you can focus on execution. This comes down to like things like control theory and focusing on your inner circle of influence, rather than obsessing about, oh, this was such a bad run out, or I got so unlucky. Try to focus more on how did I play the hand? Did I make the best play with the information I had at the time? And this is going to shift your mindset from winning to mastery, right? You want to be focusing in on like, I played this really well. I'm really proud of my discipline and my consistency. Those are the things that are going to affect your win rates in the long run. You can't control whether or not you get coolered, but you can control how well you played before you got it all in, you know? So control what you can and just let go of the rest. Your job is to try and execute at the highest level every hand, every session, and everything else is up to chance. Regroup when your game slips. Everyone tilts. The key is to recognize tilt before it takes over. One bad decision doesn't have to lead to 5. You also should recognize that there are different types of tilt. Tilt isn't just about getting unlucky. There's also such a thing as like winner's tilt, for example, where you're on such a hot streak that you start making terrible decisions. Revenge tilt, where you're just out to like punish some player. We've got a whole video out about it. But in general, what you want to do is learn to step away and reset at the right time. If you're not thinking clearly, take a break. Now, if you're not on gorilla tilt, but you're just kind of, you've sensed that you've lost focus, maybe you feel like you just got too outered and you can feel the anxiety flaring up. What you can do is something called a little micro reset. These are things like a deep breath, a quick break, just a way to kind of mentally reframe and get back to your standard state. You don't want to let that pressure kind of build up and up and up and just sit there and fester. What you want to do is kind of, okay, I'm back, right? Little motions like this can help your session out and will prevent small mistakes from snowballing and avalanching into like terrible sessions. Don't suppress your emotions. A lot of poker players will go into kind of a zombie-like state in order to prevent the anxiety from becoming overwhelming, or just because maybe they've played a lot and they're trying to multi-table and autopilot. The truth is that with tilt, it's much better to allow yourself to feel the tilt, allow yourself to feel the emotion, and then let it go, than it is to try and not feel the emotion at all. So let the feeling come in and then let it subside rather than pushing it away, right? Because that's not going to help. Remember, guys, emotions are data, not threats. Emotions are information that you can use to identify what needs fixing in your game. So acknowledge the emotion, process it, and then move on. Everyone will experience these, but you don't have to let it control your play. Lastly, reduce decision fatigue. So poker is kind of like an endurance sport, similar to, let's say, esports or golf or chess, where you're making a lot of like mental decisions very often, and that is fatiguing. It's actually quite tiring. Even like ESPN proved that like world champion chess players burn a bunch of calories because it's like a really high mental energy thing. So what your mind will naturally do is find ways to reduce decision fatigue by autopiloting, by zombieing, by button clicking. What I recommend is that you allow yourself to play automatically in most standard spots, but you got to be able to like bring it in and really focus when you're in important spots, right? So it's okay to reduce decision fatigue, but don't let that autopilot your game. Level up your lifestyle. Your mind is your most valuable asset, so invest into it like you would your edge and protect it like you would your bankroll. Things like sleep, diet, and exercise directly affect your ability to make good decisions at the poker table. At the end of the day, poker is a mental game, and you need to optimize your mind as you would your strategy. Generally, energy management is greater than time management when it comes to poker. Your focus, endurance, and tilt resistance come from how well you take care of yourself off the table. A balanced life leads to balanced play, as they say. Anecdotally, I don't know if you guys have seen that ESPN article about high-level chess players. There was something in there about like world championship level chess burning 6,000 calories a day or something absurd like that. People don't understand how taxing it is to play a high-level mental game for many, many hours continuously. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of effort, so there is some level to, you can call it like a thinking stamina, if you would. But it just goes to show, like, many of the high-level esports players, high-level chess players, high-level poker players, they are actively investing in their health because they understand that good health leads to better decisions, leads to healthier brain, and therefore sharper play. Leave ego out of it. Ego is the enemy of improvement. It makes you justify bad plays instead of learning from them. When frustration hits, follow this process. Feel it, process it, then detach from it. Your emotions are real, but they don't have to change the EV of your decisions. Remember, you're not entitled to win. Variance doesn't care how well you played, and I don't care if you have a range advantage that doesn't entitle you to the pot. Generally, poker tends to punish ego and rewards adaptable players. If you can stay objective while other players would tilt in your shoes, you'll have an edge even before the cards are dealt. That was a lot of material, and if you guys are still here, I'm proud of you. If you skipped to the end because you wanted the keynotes, well, here they are. Play dynamically and bravely. You need to adapt, exploit, and make fearless high EV plays, and you can't be afraid to change your style or get exploited. You have to be willing to change in order to improve. Study smarter, not harder. Memorization doesn't make you a great player. Understanding why plays work, understanding how to use solvers correctly, and how to make study engaging is what accelerates your growth as a player. And lastly, master your mental game. Tilt, fear, and ego are your biggest enemies. You need to stay composed, detach from the results, and focus on execution and making the best decision every time rather than obsessing over the outcomes of the hand. This video was adapted from an article written by Vanya. Vanya is one of our writers, a young German up-and-comer, and as soon as I read it, I thought to myself, wow, I would like to make a video about this. I think he did a great job, and I might have added my own flair here and there, but overall, it was largely based on his work. So if you want to read more, go check out How to Become a Winning Poker Player in 2025, link in the description. He goes into more depth of like examples with solvers and such. Yeah, I think you guys would enjoy it if you like this content so far. He's also got a coaching session coming up. Don't miss it. For more on that, I go to Vanja.
Hey guys, I'm Vanya, and this is Just the Beginning. If you found this video helpful, I would love to have you join me for my free coaching session on February the 12th. I will go over 3 advanced plays every player needs to implement into the arsenal. The kind of strategies that can instantly level up your game. This is my debut session and it's open to everyone, so don't miss out. Thanks for featuring my article and I will see you there. Bye bye.